How are you?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm just going to do a little adjustment here really quick. There we go.
Good.
That's a little better, I think. Yeah. You can see me okay?
I see you perfect.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks for tuning in today. I'm really excited to do this because, well, you're in this industry of rates and they are constantly fluctuating, unfortunately, going up.
Yep.
And they're talking about rates rising in Canada again today. So this is really, really good timing. As people are coming and joining in, I'm going to I'll set us up for our little chat.
Okay.
So, more and more, because I think you're seeing it, being that you're in Florida now. You're not from Florida. We'll talk about that in a second. But more and more Canadians are wanting to move south, whether that is to Texas, Florida, Costa Rica, where I am tuning in from today, or Mexico. These kind of seems to be in the last 2 years where a lot of Canadians are going to. And oftentimes, cash is the only means to be able to purchase in places like Costa Rica, same thing with Mexico. And even in Florida, it's very, very common, right? I'm sure you work with a lot of realtors that bring you deals or like want to bring you deals, but they're like, actually, Tim, sorry, I can't because the seller won't even look at a deal if the purchaser needs financing, right? Like it's very, very common in Florida to have cash buyers only.
Yep.
Which,
Cash is a dirty four-letter word in our vocabulary in mortgage world.
right? I know, especially when traditionally rates were so much lower, and I'm all about healthy, positive leverage.
Mm-hmm.
So when rates were lower, it's like, why would you pay cash for that? Like you can go
Right.
buy 3 places, with that.
Yep.
So
Money was cheap.
right, exactly. So, typically Canadians are saddened because they think that in order to purchase in Florida, you've got to come up with all of the cash. And so I'm really excited today to chat with you because those of you guys who have been hanging out with me for a bit know that I was in Florida for about 2.5 months. And while I was in Tampa, I got to meet Tim
Yep.
at the Hyde House, which is kind of like a Soho house. It's like a shared working space, kind of very, very cool. And so I just said, I keep getting asked all these questions about if I'm purchasing in Florida, how I'm purchasing in Florida, can Canadians get financing, foreigners? So this is it. We're gonna dive into it. So
Yeah.
Tim, I'd love for you to kind of first share with my audience, who are you, where are you from, and how long have you been in mortgages now?
Absolutely. Well, Shae, thanks a lot for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's great running into you. I like how life happens. You never know who you're going to run into. We were in the studio in Hyde House actually doing some commercials with some other realtors, and it was great that you stopped by. But yeah, I mean, Florida in general is just a place where a lot of people are moving to. It's a great location. The economy is booming. Even though interest rates are rising, we're still seeing property being purchased up by the day, just depending on what location it is. If you're anywhere near city center, your listing is going pretty quickly. So, I mean, the hot spots, every beach, every condo on the beach is taken. So now people are actually getting pretty creative and moving to some other parts of Florida because, the big 3 cities, Tampa, Orlando, Miami, right? But there's a lot in between and there's a lot of beaches. And when it comes to financing, there's a number of different options, especially for Canadians, because we're neighbors. There's actually some treaties in place that help Canadians when they sell their property not to be double taxed, from the U.S. government on the gains and the Canadian government. So there's a lot of protections in place for Canadian buyers, and they could come to the table sometimes with as little as 15%. It just depends on the investor. Myself, I'm a lender. We use our own money and team when it comes to every transaction, but we are correspondents. We work with some of the biggest banks in the U.S. And so those banks all have their own rules on how they want to lend. international borrowers often get put with a non-qualified mortgage. That just means it's not backed by the U.S. government in any way, and it's just an investor that's putting the money out there, and they kind of create the rules and guidelines on how someone who is not a U.S. citizen purchases and holds property here.
Amazing. And, you know, I think what's unique is that oftentimes people need to know somebody in order to have access to those type of lenders. And traditionally, you know, we don't think that it could be within a company. You know, it's usually that private lending in order to give you that financing. So that was another thing that I thought was like super unique when you and I spoke. I'm like, gosh, tell me more.
Yeah.
You know, like this is amazing. So, you know, we're zeroing in on Florida specifically today. For those of you guys joining, Tim and I are talking about how Canadians can obtain financing to purchase in the state of Florida. And I always say it's really wise to get 3 opinions. You know, you want to go to your bank, tell them that you are shopping around for the best rate and the best product, because I often say whenever a bank thinks you need money, they don't want to give it to you.
Yeah,
The
they make it
moment
expensive.
that, right, exactly. And the moment a bank knows you're shopping around and you're not going to give them your money easily, then they compete for that. So I always say, go to your bank. Of course, you know, you bank there. Go to another bank and compare products, but also go to a broker. Because oftentimes that broker, somebody like Tim, is really going to fight for you. And if you need to get creative on how you can obtain financing on that structure, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be your broker that's going to be doing that. So guys, thanks for tuning in. Chris, I see you. Anna, she's also a fellow mortgage specialist, but on the Canadian side. Yeah, tuning in. So Tim, walk us through. I'm a Canadian. I'm looking to buy in Florida and I want to come and speak to you. So tell me, like, how much do I need to be expecting to put down as a foreigner? What are interest rates like? Are they different for Canadians, like for foreigners versus Americans? What type of documentation are you needing to see? And maybe like, what's like the length of process, you know, because for us, typically, you know, you could submit an application and get a turnaround within 7 business days, 5 business days. For those of you guys who have purchased, you know that if you need to put in a financing condition in the United States, it's called a contingency clause. That's typically 5 to 7 days. So that's what we would be used to. So maybe walk us through that as well. Like, is that process a bit longer?
Yes, it is quite a bit longer. And it's funny because we often boast that we do loans in 7 to 8 days sometimes, because that's super fast here.
Right.
So typically a transaction is going to take between 30 and 45 days. There's a lot of different parties involved in this transaction here in the US. You have a title company, a homeowner's insurance company, a flood insurance company, maybe, certifications, inspections, appraisers. There's a lot of people involved, and sometimes an issue comes up on a Tuesday and the answer doesn't come till Thursday. Nothing moves forward till that happens. So there are a lot of moving parts in every transaction here. One issue that some of my foreign borrowers come into is that they don't have any established credit here in the US. So for Canadians especially, there is a special credit pool through our servicers that we can pull Canadian credit. And that they do some fancy math and they equate that to what a US FICO 10 score would be. And we use that to qualify for a mortgage. And so typically, if there's 2 borrowers, we're going to use the lower of the 2 credit scores in that situation. So if you and one of your best friends wanted to buy a nice beachfront condo, both of you would have to have qualifying scores to be able to purchase here.
And are you able to share like what would be considered a qualifying score?
So that is a great question. Here in the US, the minimum score for most primary home purchases is a 580. That is the lowest that most investors will go to. There's some that will go down to a 500 in some special situations, but 580 is the typical rule. You're going to get better rates and more favorable outcomes, more at the 720, 740 range, because perfect is above 800. So that's getting pretty close.
Yeah, amazing. And so let's talk about rates. When you say like you can get a better rate,
Mm-hmm.
what would that look like typically?
Mm-hmm.
And like what are rates doing right now in the States? And does that change for Canadians?
Yeah, absolutely. So Canadians are actually going to get probably a 1 or 2% higher percentage rate than a U.S.
Mm-hmm.
citizen would. That's kind of
Okay.
baked into the
Painful.
fact that yeah, it sucks, but
Yeah.
it's not the federal government that is backing these loans. They're just
Right.
private investors, or maybe they're large, but they're private investors who are offering these. And for their time and energy and money, they are going to charge a little bit more. It's kind of how it goes across the board.
Yeah.
Um, Go ahead.
Which, well, I was going to say, I mean, this is why it goes back to the golden rule of real estate:
Mhm.
location, location, location. Because if you're buying the right property
Right.
in the right location, that's kind of like the price you're paying to be able to leverage your cash in
Mhm.
Florida. So as painful as it is, I'm like, oh, 1% more. And
Yep.
it's like, well, I got to finance it. I don't need to put down all my capital, right?
Correct.
And your property should be going up in value year after year. I know
Yep.
the market is a little wonky right now, but
Mhm.
real estate in general, if you've got like a 10-year vision,
Mhm.
it's going to go down. It could, and then it'll rebound if you're buying in the right location. So,
Absolutely.
okay, so Canadians are paying a little more on the interest rate,
Yep.
and so it would that also help you? I guess they look at both. We're paying more on the interest rate
Mhm.
off the cuff,
Mhm.
but then if our credit score isn't as high, we can
Mhm.
expect to be paying even higher than that, right?
Yep, correct. So let's say an average credit score in the US, they're probably getting a 7% rate right now. There's a lot of assumptions there, but
Yeah.
we'll be very loose and warn everybody this is not an advertisement for rates, okay?
Yeah.
But average person gets around 7%. If a Canadian borrower had something in mind, they'd probably be more towards an 8% rate. So that is, 7% for someone here,
Okay.
probably 8%. But again, the market is changing so much
Yeah.
every single day. Inflation is one of the biggest issues, and it's not comforting, but the whole entire world is dealing with an inflation issue. COVID kind of spiraled
Yeah.
everyone's economy into something crazy. They shut borders down, but now we're coming out of COVID. Things are freshening back up. People are able to move here that always wanted to, or maybe they thought, hey, the rules here in my country, they're just too much for me. I'm going to move to Florida. It's a little more relaxed. There's a little more freedom, if you would, compared to some of the other states and even countries around us.
Yeah, freedom. That's a great word. And
Yes.
those of you guys who hang out with me, I'm all about that, and
Yeah.
love DeSantis. And this is not a plug for him either. So we can keep talking. We can keep talking. But I do really love him. So yeah,
Right. He's doing a great job.
he is doing a great job.
Yep.
So okay, we hear about rates; they're high. And I know nobody has a crystal ball, and we talked about this even before. Canada's calling for another rate hike.
Mm-hmm.
My banker said definitely before the end of this year,
Mm-hmm.
or like before the end of January in 2023.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of mimic each other, right?
Yep.
Canada and the US. And so rates are expected to still continue to rise.
Mm-hmm.
Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, all of our indicators and the people that we pay that are much smarter than us, they all say the same thing. We see this going into 2023, but
Right.
definitely rate the worst is right now. We're
Right.
dealing with the worst of it. It may go up a little bit more from here. And again, nobody actually knows what's going to happen tomorrow, but that's what we all expect based on history and data. So the end of 2023 is going to be where we see the lightening up of these interest rates. We'll no longer have sevens, God forbid, eights, nines, which has happened in the past before. We've been as high as 15% mortgage rates. It's not wild, but
Yeah.
based on the fact that we were at 2.5%, 2 years ago, it's a little crazy that it went that fast. But
It is. It
the
is. Well, and I'm born in the 80s,
Mhm.
and so my father's been in real estate as long as I've well, I was born and then he got into real estate. So basically, like, I've been alive as long as he's been in real estate.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I've listened to so many stories about, well, in the 80s when interest rates were 18%,
Yep.
19%, you know. So I tell people that, I'm like, I know it's alarming for me. It's alarming for you, like in our demographic, right? Because really, as long as we've had the ability to purchase, let's say, like even from like your early 20s, you know, till now, rates have been very conservative, you know,
Right.
like lower than 5%,
Right.
you know, maybe 6%, but like lower. And then in the last, like, you know, 5-10 years, we've been really spoiled with
Yeah.
like these low numbers. But I remind people, I'm like, in the 80s, it was double, more than double
Yep.
what rates are today. So, you know, think about that. And as much as it's not a great time, it doesn't feel great to buy, knowing what I just said, I
Mm-hmm.
keep saying to people, it's the best time to buy
Right.
because rates are still going to go up. And you guys know that as rates increase, your purchasing power oftentimes decreases.
Correct.
And so, you know, one way or another, you're going to have to make adjustments. So even though it doesn't feel great and it's not a great time to buy, it's still the best time to buy,
Yeah.
you know? So, okay, so tell me, what do you need from us? Like, obviously, you need a passport. You're going to need what? An income verification statement.
Mm-hmm.
I would think you're going to need like a notice of assessment. Like, if you're a entrepreneur or you're a business owner, like self-employed, you would
Yep.
need a notice of assessment.
Yep.
And then if you're an employee, you would need T4s. That's Canadian lingo, so that's
Yep.
probably. But is that kind of, am I on the right track in saying that?
Yeah, absolutely. So you'll need your T1 income tax report
Okay.
and notice of assessment, just like you said. That's equivalent to what we here in the U.S. call a 1040 U.S. Individual tax return. So for
Okay.
those that work here as well, they've seen that. The most recent 2 years of T3 and T5 slips, if we're looking at investment income, maybe someone has property and they're making money off those or just dividends off of profits. And so if there's salaries involved, we'll need some T4 slips. Most recent 2 years of business returns, the T2s, if they're self-employed, you know, they're all pretty much equivalents. You call them one thing, US calls them another, but
Sure.
we're going to need, if you're employed for yourself, there's a lot more documentation you're going to give just to prove how much money you make. The same thing for a U.S. borrower that's self-employed. They probably have 2 or 3 times the amount of paperwork to share. It's one of the downsides to being self-employed, but hey, you don't have a boss.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Yep. Yep.
And so, okay, you said 2 years, Tim, and am I correct in, I feel like I maybe missed what you said earlier. You're going to be needing 2 years to show, or do you need longer in any scenario?
2 years is the max in most situations. There's a rare situation where adding a couple years, maybe to the self-employed business owner, helps the case to show the averages and give them a little more proof as to why we can give them more income. But 2 years gives plenty of a financial picture for any bank or an investor to say, hey, yeah, this person is worthy. They can pay their loans back. We've got no issue borrowing or lending to them.
Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else you think like we should know?
You know, act fast because Florida is one of the hotter markets in the entire United States. So if Florida is where you want to be, you're going to have to connect with somebody that is local here in Florida to kind of guide you because no two situations are the same.
Sure.
You know, for one person, maybe the full cash amount down works for them. You know, maybe financing works for someone else. Maybe we need to get creative and find different kinds of financing for this situation because maybe they had no credit or they're self-employed and they just have tons of cash coming in, but they write it all off on their taxes. You know, there's so many situations that come in that we got to get creative and figure out what is best for that person and what do they want to do in the future. Are they going to live here for 30 years? You know, are they going to be 50-50? You're going to live the summers in Canada. They're going to do the winters in Florida. You know, it all depends on what they want to do because there's a lot of places where you can make your money back and even make a profit if you do short-term rentals, Airbnb, Verbo. I'm not sure if you have any other services that are similar. But yeah, I mean, yeah, there's investment opportunity everywhere, even though it may not seem like that beachfront condo. people will pay a good amount to stay out in the woods in Tallahassee somewhere, you know?
Sure. Yeah. Which, for those who don't know, Tallahassee is like north of Tampa, heading over to the Panhandle. I did not know where that was either. It kind of sounds like it would be like in Nebraska or in
Yep.
Nashville, Tallahassee,
Yep.
but it's actually in Florida on your way to the Panhandle,
Yep.
is where he's talking about. So I have a question for you.
Yeah.
It's coming in from one of our fellow, I told you Anna was joining us, who's a
Yep.
fellow mortgage specialist, and asking, is there any flexibility? So people who are self-employed entrepreneurs that don't show their true income, like, come on, we all show our true income to the government, right?
Right.
Yeah, I gotta put that on record.
Exactly.
How do we can use bank statements, right, to qualify
Correct.
for alternative lending? Is that the same with you guys? Amazing.
Yes. Yeah. So 12 or 24 months. It again depends on the investor, but they just need to see an average of the cash flow. And if you have the opportunity to write off, because sometimes those losses are losses. You know, they truly are. You didn't make any money that year.
Right.
Sometimes they're just to reduce your tax profile. When that's the case, and there are, you know, places to divert, they're like, oh, they've made an extra 200,000 this year. They could afford a mortgage, no issue. So those are one of the situations where the interest rate may be a little higher in exchange for being able to get financing in that situation.
Okay. Yeah, great question. Thanks, Anna, for bringing that in. And if you guys have other questions, feel free, put them in the comments.
Yeah.
If you have other questions and we're wrapped up, feel free to send me a DM or send Tim a DM, and obviously happy to answer those questions offline.
Yeah.
I wanted to also say, if you need a realtor down in Florida, literally pretty much anywhere across the state, I have wonderful colleagues that I've worked with for over 10 years. So whether you're in Jupiter, Cape Canaveral, the Panhandle, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, Tampa, where else? Oh my God, Sarasota, Fort Myers, Naples, Florida. I got you covered. And I'm happy to introduce you to a colleague of mine in that area. And the beauty about Tim being in Tampa is he can do everything online. So Tim is able to cover the entire state of Florida. So no matter where you are looking to purchase or considering, you know, it would be really cool to, like I said, always get 3 opinions. Definitely connect with Tim and have him give you an opinion, have him fight for you.
Right.
You know?
Got to get those offers accepted somehow.
Yeah, exactly. You know, and if you're in Tampa, obviously, you know, Tim, I'm sure you would love to meet face to face. It's not always common anymore these days, you know, like the old school way of doing business. So, yeah, anything else as we kind of wrap up a little bit?
I mean, if you're looking at moving to Florida, Tampa is going to be the place to go. Sports teams, you could be in the country tubing through crystal rivers in 1 hour, or you could be, you know, on the nicest beach in the entire U.S. In 20 minutes. You know, it's kind of an incredible place to live. I think other people are finding out about it and starting to make their way down from all parts of the world and the country. So if Tampa is where you want to be, I say act fast, get in touch with Shae, get her in touch with a great realtor, and then we'll work together. I mean, communication and who you work with matters the most. If someone answers the phone, someone works on the weekend when you're available to talk, those are the important things. And I love what
works after 5 p.m. because it's 7:30 your time.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Yeah.
I mean, what I do is just serve my customers, and I'm available when they are. The only time I'm off is most of Sunday when I'm watching football. That's about it.
Yeah, and you're hanging out with the fam, right?
Yeah.
Like,
getting fat, I'm eating my pizza, I'm relaxing.
you're so funny. Well, Sundays are important to relax, rest, family, friends, football. Talking to an American, you got to throw in football. Right?
Yep.
Awesome. Well, Tim, I really, really appreciate it. I think this has been eye-opening for hopefully a handful of Canadians that tuned in, because like I said, for so long, we just have this understanding that unless you're buying with cash, that's the only way to enter the market in Florida. So this is exciting.
There's options.
Yeah. And who knows? Maybe I'm going to meet you in Tampa soon and get a place there.
Hey, you know where to find me.
I do. Yeah.
It
Awesome.
was
Thanks,
nice
Tim,
to
so
meet
much. Have a great
you.
evening. Thank you.
You too. Bye-bye.
Ciao. Bye.